Hi, guys. Welcome to the How I Raised It podcast, the show where you get an inside, unfiltered look at how real entrepreneurs and VCs raise capital for their businesses. I'm your host, Nathan Beckert, and today's episode is with Laura Epstein of Pulse Charter Connect, an organ transport logistics startup that helps move hearts and livers and kidneys around the country via air. Pretty cool business. To fund her business, Laura went through 7 different accelerator programs. And so we talk about how to make the most of accelerators, demo day tips, questions to ask investors to make sure they can deploy capital, tips for communicating noteworthy events to investors, and much more. If you're tuning into this podcast to learn how to raise capital for your business, be sure to check out Foundersuite.com if you're a startup, or Fundingstack.com if you are a VC or advisor. Both platforms will give you access to an awesome collection of tools for raising capital, including a massive investor database, a new Get Intro tool to secure warm intros to investors, a CRM to manage your raise, a virtual data room to run due diligence, plus pitch deck hosting, investor updates, email tools, and much more. Last but not least, if you enjoy this conversation and think someone else would too, please share it with them and hit that subscribe button to get all our latest episodes. Thank you. Now sit back and enjoy this chat with Laura.
Welcome to How I Raised It, the podcast that goes behind the scenes with entrepreneurs who've raised capital. We uncover the tips, tricks, and techniques they use to get investors to write a check. Strap in and turn it up.
Hi, welcome to another episode of How I Raised It, produced by Foundersuite.com and Fundingstack.com. Today I have Laura Epstein of Pulse Charter Connect coming to us from Chicago. How's your day going?
Great. It's nice and sunny here. So a very welcome change from winter.
Well, let's jump right into it. What is Pulse Charter Connect?
Yes. So we are a healthcare logistics platform that helps transport organs and surgical teams for transplant.
Yeah. How did you get into that? What's the backstory?
So my background is fully within transportation, aviation specifically. So I studied aerospace engineering, got my pilot's license, and worked at the FAA for about 5 years out in DC. And then I moved to Chicago to get my MBA and was hired for a consulting project with a private jet company that was flying around organs and surgical teams. So that was really how I saw how it was occurring, what could be improved about all of the underlying systems, and really was excited about utilizing private jets for social good and started Pulse Charter Connect from there.
Okay, let's go into that a little bit. So, yeah, tell us more about that. So, you're matchmaking owners of private jets with organ donors, recipients. What? You tell me.
Yeah. So, traditionally, how the system works is that when there is a donor organ available, so somebody had passed, there's actually a federal allocation system that will connect the recipient with the donor organ. But then it's up to the recipient surgical team to coordinate the transportation to go out there and recover the organ for surgery, bring it back and transplant it successfully into their recipient. So we're coordinating all of the private jets that may be required, as well as the ground transportation for the teams to go there and back.
Interesting. And let's take it bit by bit. The private jets, these are usually owned by individuals, and are they like contributing their jets either to monetize downtime or to like for social good to help people who are needy an organ transplant, or both?
Yes, I'd say with these missions, it's predominantly to utilize unused capacity, so the downtime. However, there's organizations like Angel Med Flight where they might be flying the recipient and donating their time. If I need a transplant in New York, but I'm based out of Chicago, they might help get me as the recipient from Chicago to New York.
Yeah, interesting. And then there's an established donor, how do I put this? Donor/recipient market already. You're not kind of creating a secondary organ market, are you? You're more just,
No.
Yeah.
That's not on a federal level. So we are not touching the matching process there at all. However, the distance of the organ to the recipient does inform the matching. So we are definitely interested in utilizing our data to help the allocation systems to get the organ to the right recipient.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. How long does two-part question. What's the shortest lived organ? And what's the longest lived organ? Outside the body.
Yeah, so a heart can be outside the body for 4 to 6 hours, and then kidneys, it's up to 24 hours. So very different time spans with like lungs and livers somewhere in between.
Wow, interesting. And what's the I just am curious about this stuff because it's such a
Mhm.
fascinating world that you can literally remove a heart, keep it alive for 6 hours, and put it in someone
Yeah.
else across the country. It's kind of insane. Um, what's in shortest, greatest supply or demand, you know?
Um, the most transplanted organ is the kidney, which also has the longest wait list.
Mm,
Um, Especially like with people on dialysis waiting for a transplant, et cetera. And you could also donate that while you are alive. So we don't need both kidneys that we have. You can very well live a long, prosperous life with just one.
yeah, gotcha. And then are there any really like exo maybe exotic's not the right word, but like kind of esoteric organs that go across your logistics network?
We really do like solid organs, so hearts, livers, lungs, um, kidneys, and pancreases. There is interesting research with like vascularized allografts. We have not done those though.
Hmm. Okay. I don't even know what that is, but okay, cool. Uh,
That's kind of a catch-all for all of the other types of transplants that could be done. There's also like the bone marrow and the tissue, and those have longer cold times.
yeah, interesting. Gotcha. This is a dumb question. I might even chop this out, but there's not like a scalp transplant market, is there, for balding people like myself
Hair
and people who
transplants.
have thick manes of hair?
I know hair transplants exist in Turkey. I'm not, or like there's a lot of like medical tourism for them. I
Yeah,
don't
right.
really know how it works.
I think that's, I've been to Turkey. I didn't get a hair transplant. I was there to give an entrepreneurship talk. And it's interesting because you go to cafes in Turkey and you see men with bandages all over their hair, but they're out at the nightclubs and cafes and restaurants, with their kind of bandages that look like they're still kind of bleeding. It's really weird. I think it's all micrograph stuff where they're like taking it from the back of their head and putting it on the top.
I think so. It looks pretty painful, to be honest.
Yeah, it looks painful. I don't think I would go that route. I was just curious if that's such a thing as a scalp transplant for cosmetic vanity reasons. Hopefully, probably not. But um, very interesting. And how long you guys been around? And if you have any metrics, like how many organs have flown on your system or anything like that?
Yeah, we've been around since April of 22, and we've transported 65 organs thus
Okay,
far.
interesting. I assume it's pretty expensive to transport it. I mean, you're using the whole plane, of course, if it's a very perishable organ. Um, it's pretty expensive. What's it cost to transport an organ?
Like $35,000 on average,
Wow.
because they're requiring the private jet for both ways.
And is that paid or subsidized by government, or is it all private money, coming out of my pocket? Insurance money? What? Like who pays for it all?
In the end, it's insurance. So there's an organ acquisition cost, which basically is like a lump sum CPT code. It includes things such as the transportation of the organ.
Yeah, interesting. Um, Very interesting business. So talk about raising capital for this. What's it been like? Maybe, well, first of all, how much have you guys raised? How many rounds? And
Mhm.
maybe talk about the journey and your process.
Yeah, we raised a little bit over $3 million. So we first did a pre-seed round in 2023, and then just finished up our seed round in earlier this year in 2024. Process has been a lot. I think all the founders can sympathize that it's been a really tough market to raise in. Especially healthcare in itself has been very difficult as well. So I'd say that our pre-seed round was a lot of angel investors that we really took a large assortment of check sizes, Whereas by the seed round, we were able to be a little bit more discriminatory in the size of the check that we were bringing into our cap table, just for that cap table management.
Yeah. Let's go one by one. So pre-seed, I saw on your website you were part of some incubators, accelerators. How did
Mhm.
you kind of find and connect with and ultimately get angels to write a check for this type of business? Like,
Yes, it was a lot of just going around different circuits. I'd say the accelerators were super helpful. So we did Tampa Bay Wave in Florida, which was incredible. We also participated in Techstars and Mass Challenge, and we were able to meet different investors through those programs as well. But it really was finding people that either thought they could add value, whether they were a logistics expert, they knew about transplant, they're a surgeon, or just people that were really excited by some part of the mission and probably were already an angel investor somewhere else. So we weren't teaching them about the nuances of investing.
yeah, that was sort of my next question. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this. Like, if I was raising money for this, would I go after people who have or surgeons, right? They're very wealthy oftentimes, and they would get what you're doing. Do you go after people who have had a family member, needing an organ transplant? They might want to pay it forward, pay it back, you know, supporting this. Did pretty much all your angels have some like personal connection to the cause, or did some were some just like, hey, this is gonna make me lots of money? Yeah.
I think a lot were just excited about what the mission was. So I was more connected in logistics, I guess, whether that's being in Chicago or working at the FAA previously. But it was a lot of investors that had that background and were excited to use it within healthcare to save lives. In terms of people affected by transplant, we do have a lot of investors on that side as well. It really was a lot of getting to know the different people on all of the phone calls that I had with potential investors and advisors.
Did everyone come through, one of these accelerator networks or your own background? Did you do any cold outreach? Did you do any, other techniques to source? This is, and the reason I ask, like, it's always a question I get from founders, like, hey, I'm in this kind of niche business, something very specialized. How do I identify investors for that, right? It's a common challenge when you're in something a little bit niche. Yeah. What do you think?
Absolutely. I avoided cold outreach, not meaning that I actually knew the people that I was jumping on the call with, but if I was able to facilitate a warm introduction by any method necessary, so like stalking the LinkedIn mutual connections, figuring out, maybe two different stages apart there, I could be able to connect to them, speaking with investors that potentially passed if they knew somebody else that could be interested. So that was really how we were able to curate the pipeline. I did a few cold applications, but I do not believe any of them turned into an investment.
And how about, you're somewhat unique in that you've gone through, like you said, Wave, Techstars, Mass Challenge. I also see 1871, Matter, Polsky, and SI or something on your site. So
Mhm.
you've gone through a lot of programs or been a part of a lot of things. How have you leveraged all these programs to generate investor interest?
Yeah, I think a lot of the programs do a great job of having mentors that could be potential investors or could connect you to other ones. It's also just really great to like build out this community. So a handful of the ones you mentioned are local to Chicago. So I just really further networked myself throughout and was able to utilize those to meet more and more people. And uh, using these beyond, obviously, the point of this podcast is talking about fundraising, but also potential customers or potential hires. So really all different facets of the startup.
So when you get into Wave or 1871 or Polsky or whatever, what's your method of, just signing up and asking for mentors? Like, what's your process to kind of get the most? Let me reframe this question. What's your tips or process for getting the most value out of these programs?
Yes, I think there's a time and a place for everything. So I went through the Tampa Bay wave when we were a very young company and learning a lot more of the intricacies of starting a business, what the contract should look like, what accounting software to use, how to track all the different investors that you're connecting with, et cetera.
What'd you
And
use
that
for
was
that?
Foundersuite, of course.
Hey, was that a leading question or what? Anyway, sorry. Keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was great just getting the organizational structure behind us. Then, as we did Techstars, which was a little bit later in our existence, we really used that to meet with different investors. And then most recently, we did the Cedar Sinai Accelerator, which is out of a healthcare system. And that was super helpful to actually work our way towards a pilot with the hospital itself. So I think the best way to get the most out of these different programs is realizing the exact stage you're at and what you would consider success after 3 months in the program, because those could be some realistic goals that you can work towards.
That makes sense. Yeah. And is there enough difference between these different programs? I mean, I guess, Cedar Sinai very clearly healthcare focused, Techstars maybe not so much, but are you sort of hearing the same things? Do they start to get a little repetitive? Or are you?
Yes, I don't think you need to do all of the different accelerators out there. I think because as a founder, time is your most valuable resource. You can pick and choose which makes sense. I utilize some of them a lot more than others. I'd say for like 1871, it was a lot more of utilizing their space. So they just are like, they also offer a co-working space in Chicago. So that was really great to meet different people. Whereas, the Cedar Sinai Accelerator was a lot more programming heavy with guest lectures from different stakeholders throughout the hospital system.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. Any other tips for just making the most of accelerators? Anything you haven't mentioned?
I think the more you can spend time with like your cohort and in person, the easier it is to make connections throughout, whether that's in regards to fundraising or just having a new community to help support you through the process. But I really enjoyed, going to a happy hour after a long day of meetings and all of us sharing what happened throughout the day and what we could do better for the next time.
And you did some pitch competitions too, right? Like Tech
Mhm.
Rise. I don't even know what that is. What's that?
Yes, Tech Rise is a pitch competition in Chicago that is focused on underrepresented founders. So that one's really great because the winner gets some non-dilutive financing. So it was super great. We were able to win $125,000 non-dilutive by Tech Rise.
Is that just by having a great pitch or something else?
The finale was through a pitch, but they did offer coaching services, et cetera, to help get us prepared for the pitch.
You went through multiple accelerators. Were almost all of them equity based? In other words, the question is, did you have to give equity to like six or seven different accelerators, or most of these were not?
5 out of 7 were not.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So it was more just like a time basis, and some of them might have been virtual, where you would spend some time on the programming, but also it just was a lot easier to give them an hour a week rather than other ones were in person, where I actually moved out to LA for 3 months last year.
Yeah, fun. Um, any tips for demo day? I mean, I'm sure Wave had a demo day, Techstars had a demo day. Like any tips for getting the most out of those, getting the most interest?
So demo day is really interesting. I think my tips is just to have fun. I think I had a lot of expectations that everybody was gonna like come with me with a check in hand, ready to invest. And it's really just an introduction and a way for you to get the next meeting, which we were successful at. But I think the having fun shows that you're passionate about your startup, and it really helps, assuage any disappointment you may have from, of course, they're not going to run up to you with like the $1 million check, but there was some part of me that was like ready for it.
Yeah, yeah. If you're willing, you can pun on this question, but if you're willing, like which of the different accelerators you've been involved with do you think has the, richest investor network, right? I mean, obviously you hear about Y
Yes.
Combinator and all that stuff, but like beyond that, who's got a really good like community of investors around it?
Yes. So I think Cedar-Sinai Accelerator was great because it was linked to the Cedar-Sinai Health Ventures, which is their own VC arm. So not super often is there potential for follow-on investment from the actual accelerator itself. I know Techstars, it might be like a 150 additional investment. So that was automatic introduction to their fund and automatic like initial investment. I think in LA they had a great network of healthcare investors. I think Tampa Bay Wave does a good job of the East Coast and like the Gulf South having a network. And then Techstars is pretty national, which was also interesting because I'd say most of my Techstars investor introductions were virtual with a variety of different investors all over the country.
Yeah, interesting. How many angels came in on that pre-seed?
It was like 30.
Okay. Yeah. Did you do a price round or like a safe or a convertible note?
The pre-seed, we did a safe. We had one convertible note with Techstars because those were kind of like their standard terms. And then for our seed round, it was priced. So we were
Okay.
able to convert all the safe notes.
Let's talk about the price round then a little bit. So, were these VCs, more angels, something else? What?
So we had two co-leads for $1.5 million and they were VCs. So they priced out the round.
Who is that? I'm assuming it's not secret.
IB Ventures out of Indianapolis and Simplex Ventures out of New York.
Ivy Ventures and Simplex co-leads.
Mhm.
Cool. What let's talk about that for a second. What does that mean to have them co-lead? That's I wouldn't say it's rare, but that's a little bit, often there's a lead and then a bunch of co-investors. So how did you guys arrange a co-lead or why did that become like that?
I think the interest was to get the check size to be the majority of the round. And the primary investor of Ivy didn't have a large enough fund to do that themselves.
Okay, so they brought in Simplex. Do they bring in Simplex or do they push it on you to bring in a co-lead?
They were really great about and proactive about finding various co-leads. Simplex was already an investor on our cap table, so we were able to, with that relationship, kind of build them to be a co-lead with Ivy as well in the next round.
Okay, cool. What was your funnel like for this seed round? Did you talk to lots of investors? Um,
Lots and lots and lots of investors. I say my advice about the pipeline is really being super communicative with all of the different potential investors you've spoken to. We had ones that passed on us from the seed for whatever or on the pre-seed for whatever reason, and invested in the seed because they were able to actually see our traction and believe that the promises that we were making early on, we were able to fulfill within a reasonable time span.
yeah, that's great. And I've heard similar stories like that, and I think it's so powerful. What did you do to keep them updated? You just add them to a company update list, or did you call them once a month, or what?
In Foundersuite, I used the send emails, and it was really fun to see who opened them. Always liked seeing who opened and who responded and who just read it, and I would have never known that they had opened the email. I often did not request calls just for making the best use of everybody's time. But if a potential investor ever asked me to schedule time, there was an immediate booking of that in order to just catch up and share the latest news of our startup.
Yeah, cool. Um, any tips on that? I mean, I think that's an important, powerful thing. I'm always telling founders do this, right? Even if unless someone's told you 100% no, you know, I think you should keep them up to date with your progress because you do see people warm up over time. So, any tips for just like keeping people apprised of your progress? What were you communicating? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there's so many different ways to show growth. So we were doing that many different ways. So whether it was the closing of the pre-seed round, the hiring of like the next person that, or the onboarding of the advisor that's super strategic to the company, the generation of revenue, the increase in revenue, et cetera. So the way that we went about it was more so a regular cadence. and filling it out with the noteworthy events that happened during that duration, just so that they could follow the journey. And being really honest and also just ask where we could utilize some help and potentially this network of people that are reading our newsletters are able to step up and help us out.
What was your cadence? How frequently do you send out noteworthy events?
The cadence that we like is bi-monthly, but there was different time spans. So we had a lot going on last year where we were just so excited and we would do it, every 3 weeks instead for a little bit because there were so many things going on and we really wanted to get that out there in real time.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think that's always interesting. It's people ask me all the time, like how frequently, like if I'm bugging them every 2 weeks or a week, that's too much. Every 2 months, sometimes it's too little, finding that Goldilocks of cadence. And it kind of does depend on what's news and newsworthy going on in your business. Sometimes you have periods where you're closing a bunch of cool deals and you want to get that out. So that's interesting. Cool. What's any other tips or thoughts or war stories we haven't covered? Yeah.
Um, I mean, I think I've had similar war stories to other founders that um, you don't have the investor till the check's wired.
Yeah.
So,
Did you have someone drop out
yep,
last
we've
minute?
had somebody drop out and had to make up that capital. So that was really interesting. We've, thought it was a shoe-in, and then all of a sudden somebody else said no. And it could be they don't like the business, or it could be they weren't able to close their fund, or they're not as liquid if they're an angel as they thought they once were. So, as important it is to track where you are on your close and the percentage, it's still not there until it's in your bank account.
100%. I say that all the time.
Mhm. I
How do
thought
you
it wouldn't
know?
happen to me. I was like, I'm different, and
Yeah.
this group is so great, but um, for whatever reason, some investors didn't work out.
It's easy, I think, as a founder. Fundraising is grueling, soul sucking, and you just want it to get over with. And so you maybe hear things with rose tinted monocles. That doesn't make any sense. But you know what I'm saying? You hear things with a bit of a rose color on it. And yeah, investors drop out all the time. Everything you just said, right? They are angel investors and their portfolio is just taking a big hit because of
It's
tariffs or
tariffs.
whatever. You know, and they just don't have the liquidity anymore. Yeah, that the other one you mentioned where it's like a fund that's raising. I think this is a frustrating one for founders, right? They have a venture fund interested in leading or co-leading, whatever, but it's contingent on the venture fund finishing raising their fund. And that can take a long time, right? That's a terrible trap to be in, you know.
Yeah.
Did you identify, and maybe I don't know if this was the case, but like, did you ask the venture funds like, hey, do you have the capital to put to work? Like sometimes I tell people, qualify the investor, make sure they actually have the capital, and it's not contingent on raising that next fund. Did you run into that situation?
I mean, I tried to ask that question, not always. It was like a dry powder or like what vintage is this fund? How
Yeah.
large is it? Do you reserve for follow-on, et cetera? Um, but I think just like also the markets have been so strange that maybe they're like closing up that fund and it would have been a smaller check. So then they're going to put you into the next fund, which is a larger check, but that one they're still raising for. So you're not even sure which fund is going to be the investor in your specific company. There's also the classic, diligence is taking 4 to 8 weeks according to them, but it takes triple that amount of time. And that's also not unusual. So the timing is a little bit unpredictable.
Those, I just took notes on those two things. I think those are three good questions to ask, right? How much dry powder do you have? Which vintage fund would we be going into? And
Mhm.
do you reserve, capital for follow-on investments? Those are all three really good questions to ask because those will uncover kind of everything we just discussed, right? Like, do they have money to put to work now or later? and will they co-invest later?
And
Or
I think the check size ownership target are also two
yeah,
really interesting questions because as we were finally finalizing out our round, investors were saying that the amount we were raising was too small. And that was like a new one for me because we didn't get that in the beginning. Because we were looking at seed stage companies, not or seed stage funds, not necessarily A, but even so, if we don't have $1 million left in the fund where they can get their 10% ownership target, it doesn't make sense for their thesis.
that's a good one. Yeah. What's your check size and what's your ownership target? That's good. Any other questions you like to ask investors to kind of qualify them or?
I like asking how long somebody's been with the fund,
Yeah.
like more of a personal connection, and then also just like figure out how far they see the deals through.
The seed round, was it just the two venture funds or did you have a bunch of other smaller checks come into?
Angels too. Wow, I really should know how many people are on my cap table right now. But we have some final checks trickling through. So it was really, those were the large ones. And then now we're just focused on rounding it out with, we had, I think 90% of angels recommit, but then
Okay.
also bringing new angels.
Nice. 30 angels in that first round. That's quite a few people, quite a few cats to herd. Any tips for kind of herding the cats towards that close and getting them cut a check?
I think it was just a lot of touch points, a lot of keeping them updated. Basically, what we're always saying about just like a regular cadence. I think what the question I get asked is if it's too many. And for us, it was what we were able to accomplish. And we really like all the people on our cap table. So it's what made sense. I didn't want to limit out the potential strategic investors that we could get just because the check size might have been smaller than we would have liked. So we just, converted the safes as needed when we did. And it was more safes than a lot of other companies had, but it made sense for us.
Yeah, interesting. Anything else we haven't covered?
I've been a user of Foundersuite. I think I've emailed you a few times with questions, but it's been great. So I like the tool a lot.
So that's really interesting. Thanks for using Foundersuite. How do you use it or why is it valuable to you?
Yes. I really use it to track the entire pipeline. I wasn't the biggest user when we first got started because I thought I could just do it on my own. But as we continued to meet more and more potential investors, learn more about their fund, that I keep the notes throughout the CRM on Foundersuite as well. And then really incorporate all of the different stakeholders that I've spoken to at that fund because the amount of time somebody has left, and then I put in a new email. And I really need to make sure that all the contacts are updated so that when I can send the emails and track the emails and all of that, it's super helpful having the ability to do that in one tool instead of like how haphazard I was doing it previously.
Good, thank you. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do is kind of combine because that's what founders have been doing forever. They have a spreadsheet here and sticky notes over here, and they're using this and this and this email tool and something else. We're trying to pull it all together so it's all pretty seamless. So thanks for being a customer.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate it. Cool, cool. All right, last question. This is one I always ask. If you were doing it all over again, what advice would you give your younger self?
I think what I have learned is that few updates are really too small to share. I think when we were getting started, I was so nervous that that cadence it wouldn't be interesting, like the momentum that we had gathered, but really there's so many small steps in a startup that build upon itself in order to set you up for the future. And particularly angel investors know that and are excited about the company, and they even want to celebrate those little wins with you or help you on those little asks.
Especially if they've been entrepreneurs themselves, they get that little some of those little things. They might sound little to an outsider, but landing your first CTO or whatever it is, like it's kind of a
Like
huge
filing
deal.
your taxes, we're doing that and took more time than I would have liked.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, if people will want to learn more, where should we point them, or if they want to connect with you, anything you want to promote?
Both me and the company Pulse Charter Connect are active on LinkedIn, so feel free to find us there. If you want to learn more about Pulse, email us at info@pulsecharterconnect.com.
Cool. Well, good luck. It sounds like a pretty interesting business. Kind of crazy to think that this exists, but it's cool that it does. Um, Thank you, Laura, and we'll catch you after you raise your next round. How about that?
Great. Thank you very much.
All right. Over now. Bye.